Hey, welcome to what's going to be my last episode in Coffee and HEMA on talking about tournament styles and tournament systems. I was asked a question about what my favorite tournament system is, and I don't really have one, but I do want to share the system that I designed, some Sword Shenanigans, that I really liked because it tackled a bunch of issues. And what I was looking for was a system that could take a wide range of fencers in terms of their skills and abilities, make sure that they all got a lot of good fights, where I define good fights as a range but mostly close matchups, and that over the course of the tournament, the matches that would be happening would go from relatively large extremes in terms of skill disparities, and everybody in the tournament would get closer and closer and closer to their own skill as the tournament progressed, resulting in everybody getting a final against someone who was closely matched to them. This was intended to be run as an internal tournament, but also I thought maybe it would be appropriate for bigger tournaments. I think it would absolutely work with a bigger tournament. But that's why I had that massive skill disparity in mind as I was doing it, because we've got some people in my club who have gold medals, multiple gold medals, and we've got people in my club who've never done a tournament before. So I wanted all of them to have a good time. Equally important that they all come away thinking, "Oh, that was fun. I want to do it again." And importantly, I also had in mind that in this context, the judges would have to be drawn from the tournament itself, right? So I wanted a system that was both relatively straightforward from a judging perspective, because that skill disparity that I talked about in terms of fencing was also there in terms of judging. Again, we've got many very experienced judges, and we've got many people who never judged before. I wanted to as well avoid many of the common pitfalls that I talked about in a previous video about common judging errors. So the first thing I want to talk about is the match setup, and then I'm going to talk about how kind of progression happens across the tournaments and they relate to each other. So the match setup. As well as this, because fences were going to also be judges. I'll explain why that was not so problematic later on. I wanted a system that could be run purely from a phone, right? I didn't want it from the HEMA scorecard from a phone. So I did away with the concept of a timer altogether. A match then became 2 separate exchanges. The scoring was pretty simple. Everything was 1 point. That meant there was no debate about, oh, did you hit the head or the shoulder or this and that. It was 1 point with relatively strict hit quality rules, in terms of not being flat, in terms of not cut with the tip, cut with the edge. I didn't require bend on a thrust. I've talked about that before as a safety risk. But I did give the judges some rules of thumb, which is that if you're not sure whether something was good enough quality, you're on the fence, assume it was good quality. And if you're not sure whether something hit, as in did it get through the parry or not, assume that it doesn't get through the parry, just to make it very clear about where to draw the line. So judges had not just their own gut feel to go to, but they had some explicit rules they could come back to. But everything was 1 point. As well as that, you score in full. So if I hit cleanly, I get 1 point. If I get hit, then my opponent gets 1 point, and if we both hit, then we both get 1 point. Right, so it goes up. How that plays into later rules matters. I'll come back to that. So your possible score at the end of a match is anything from 7-0 to 7-7, right? Because you must have 7 exchanges, and you could have 4-3, right? If it was a nice clean fight, you could have 7-7 if it was a very doubly fight. At a very long afterblow window. And the afterblow window, I switched the way I defined it from, rather than say about there's 2 people in afterblow, right? A attacks B, B hits back. And normally when we define afterblow rules, it's about what does B do. Instead, I defined it about what does A do. So A has hit B, and I said, if A wants to avoid an afterblow, they can either parry the first strike that comes in, dodge the first strike that comes in, so defend against the strike coming in, 1 defense only, that's fine, you're done. Or retreat out of distance, So they're making an active attempt to retreat or close to grapple and secure the blade. Or if they're already in a grapple, there's no afterblow opportunity. I think if I did it again, I'd add in, if they've got a strike that locks out an opponent's strikes or a counter thrust or something like that, I think I probably also wouldn't allow an afterblow in that circumstance. But essentially now, the afterblow person, the attacker, the person who lands the first hit, has to do something to get out. B still only gets one strike, and I just said a feint is a missed strike, so that doesn't count, so they can't do multiple strikes. And I also said if A is retreating and B is having to chase them down, that's good enough, right? A has made the attempt to retreat, and that's fine, right? If they're chasing him down, that's it. Last thing about matches is the draws were not possible. Again, I'll come back to why. But I didn't want sudden death. I didn't want everything to kind of explode. So I came up with a set of criteria to determine who wins in a draw. So essentially there was a first blood rule, which is that if whoever first got a clean hit against the opponent, the first person to get a clean hit against the opponent, they have the advantage. So if it comes to a draw at the end of it, they win, right? First blood rule. If no one had a clean hit, if it's a match of 7 doubles, then I did make them play sudden death at that point. I think if I did it in future, I'd probably count it as a double loss. But I did had a sudden death in that case was the only time hit location mattered, and essentially there I had highest location on the body had priority. So if there was a double in sudden death, the higher hit target would win. And if it was the same, a thrust was counted higher than the cut, and if that was still the same, then they play again. As I said, if I ran it again, I think I'd just say 7-7, double out, you lost. Everybody loses. How does that all fit into... So made for nice simple matches, right? 7 exchanges, you know exactly how many exchanges you've got, everything's 1 point, judging was very straightforward. I didn't allow a protest because I wanted things to go quickly, which is why I had quite tight criteria about things, and people complained about that a lot afterwards. But the real fun, I think, which could work with any match system really that doesn't allow draws at least, was how the tournament was organised. So my original plan was to have 2 rounds of pools. In the end, I only had 1 round of pools. And the pools were relatively small, pools of 4, which sucks. Pools of 4, you only get 3 fights, right? That's terrible. But instead of an elimination bracket, I had a Swiss bracket at the end. And what happened was, in your pool of 4, you were then your pool round determined which Swiss bracket you went into. I think one year I played it, there were 2 brackets, and one year I played it that essentially there were 4 Swiss brackets. So of 8, I believe, if I remember correctly. And the winners of each pool went into the top bracket. The losers, the second people in the next pool, went into the second bracket. Third and third, fourth and the fourth bracket, right? So everybody is progressing, but rather than progressing to an elimination tree where suddenly the bottom tier person is fencing the top tier person, they're progressing to a Swiss bracket with people who are pretty much the same skill level as them, or at the same performance level as them so far. It wasn't quite a true Swiss bracket in that Swiss bracket you are matched. So if you rank fences 1 to 8, with Swiss brackets 1 and 2 fight, 3 and 4 fight, 5 and 6 fight. Instead, within your Swiss bracket, you were fighting 1 to 8, at least in the first round. But in subsequent rounds, it was based upon you were fencing top to bottom performance of the people who had the same number of wins as you, right? And I should have said this. Sorry, the ranking is based first on wins, and second on number of hits received, right? So a 7-6 win, yeah, it's a win, great, but you're going to be ranked very lowly by comparison to your peers from that kind of doubly win, right? So that meant that clean fights stood you better in terms of the rankings, in terms of where you would be fencing against. So if your first round you had 8 people in your Swiss, 4 people win, okay. and say one of them wins 7-0, one of them wins 6-7, right? And these two are somewhere in the middle. These two are going to be fighting in the next round. These two are going to be fighting in the next round. Okay. For Swiss of 8, you had 2 fights in the Swiss. It's normally be 3. I'll explain why in a second. And everybody then gets a final, right? The top 4 of each bracket. This is where it got a little bit complicated. The top 4 of each bracket are based on the 4 people who've not yet lost in the second round, right? So those 4 people fight. 2 of them win, so these 2, and 2 of them lose, right? These 2 are fighting for the top spot of the bracket, so gold and silver in the top bracket. These 2 are fighting for the third and fourth positions in the bracket, so bronze and silver. Essentially, those people have had an elimination tree. It's just that when you lose in your elimination tree, your day's not over. You're now fencing for a lower position. Everybody else then has a final based upon their position in the bracket, right? So you essentially have everybody going down to the last position. It's fencing for 5th or 6th, 7th or 8th, all the way down to whatever it was, 32nd and 31st. And that fight, in theory, is against the person who's most closely matched to you across the whole course of the tournament. If I was running a bigger tournament, I would do pools of 4 and Swiss bracket of 16. Gets people 7 fights if you do it that way. Nice number of fights. Good for everybody. Everybody gets 7. When you have odd numbers, what I do, if it doesn't fit perfectly into Swiss systems, I put the odd numbers in the bottom Swiss bracket, because that meant that the people with the least experience, in theory, get the most extra experience. So people who need experience the most get the most fights, rather than the people who have the most experience get the most fights, which is what normally happens. It also means that the mathematics adds up perfectly for the top tier, so you can essentially, the people who are winning all the things in the top tier are guaranteed to be going on to medal matches. Whereas if you've got not exactly multiple of 2 numbers of Swiss, you get some weird results. And I figured it didn't matter so much in the lower brackets. So you're fencing for 17th versus 18th. No one's going to care too much. Whereas if it's the difference between fencing for bronze and fencing for 7th place, it does matter more. So that's why I did it that way. So really, as I say, by and large, I think it went well. I really enjoyed fencing it in the first year. The admin overhead was a bit bigger than I expected it to be, which I think was the only real downside. And I had to do a lot more work on some of the pool rounds, sort of Swiss rounds, than I thought I would. Which is in the second year I ran it just basically as a beginner's tournament, which was still very fun. I think that judges didn't do the after rule particularly well. People stopped a bit too early. But I think that was just because I threw people into it and, with no training. And I think the second year, actually, people were better at it because I was explicit to them about, trying to wait a heartbeat before calling halt. But fundamentally, one of the things I really like about it is that everybody got stretching fights, right? You start off with some interesting ones where, kind of there's a big mismatch, in terms of skill disparity, and you get some people who like to kind of see where they're aiming for, but there's only one, right? And as the tournament progressed, every single fencer is getting closer and closer matches, like matches where they are having to pull out their best. And what I really liked from it was the fact that everybody gets an exciting final, right? Not just you still have your showcase gold and silver, bronze match, right? But everybody goes into a final knowing that their performance in that thing will determine where they end up in the tournament. That's something that I've repeated in the beginners tournaments at Wessex League, and I was very happy that even people who come last in those have reported kind of good experiences from them. Which is my only concern with everybody getting a final. So that means that someone is dead last, and they lost it. But even the people who come last, come out and say, well, at least they ended on a match where they felt that they could have won. Right? It's the kind of gambler's addiction. Could have won feels good. Feeling like there's no chance you could have won doesn't feel so good. So I would absolutely fence it in again. I would love to run it as a larger tournament. I think it's got lots of things going for it. And particularly the matchups is the thing that I think I like the most. This whole kind of pools to Swiss model. Thanks for watching, and as I say, this is my last one on tournament systems. I'm going to move to answering some of the questions that have come in because I built a bit of a backlog up because I've been focused on this for quite a while.